I never thought a simple errand could feel like stepping into another world. The smell of motor oil and old leather filled the garage, but it wasn't the grease that caught my attention. It was the way she moved. She was leaning over a dented hood, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly loose around her shoulders, and for a second, I froze. My girlfriend trusted me blindly, leaving me here alone with her older sister. But even as I told myself that, my chest tightened. She glanced up, caught me staring, and for a heartbeat, her eyes flickered, sharp, assessing, curious. Not judgmental, exactly, but like she could see right past the half-truths I'd been telling myself all day. I cleared my throat, too aware of the warmth in my palms, the awkward weight of my own gaze. "Need a hand?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out rougher than I intended. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted, brushing a streak of grease off her forearm, and held out her hand. Just that gesture, simple, matter-of-fact, sent a pulse through me I didn't expect. We didn't speak for a few seconds, and in that silence, I realized I'd been holding my breath. Her confidence was effortless. She knew exactly what she was doing, though she didn't flaunt it. There was a precision in her movements, a quiet authority in the way she tilted her head, the faint curve of a smile that suggested she knew something I didn't. And yet, for all that poise, there was a softness too, like the brief tilt of her fingers when she handed me a wrench, almost brushing mine, almost more than accidental. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. There was something electric in the way she examined the engine, then glanced up again, catching my gaze before I could pull back. A small laugh escaped her, almost a whisper. It was enough to make my chest ache, enough to make me aware of every second stretching between us. My girlfriend's voice echoed in my mind. "Trust me." And I wanted to obey, wanted to be the loyal one, but every time our eyes met, it felt like a different kind of loyalty was being tested. I noticed the little things, how her knuckles flexed over the metal, the way her hair fell forward when she leaned closer, the faint smell of perfume that didn't belong in a garage. I stepped forward to hand her a socket wrench, and for an instant, our fingers brushed. Nothing happened, not really, but the heat lingered, an invisible spark between us. She gave me a small nod, a subtle acknowledgement, and went back to her work, leaving me with a strange mix of admiration and guilt. I left the garage later that afternoon with the engine humming under my hands, but the image of her, half-smile, confident stance, and the trace of warmth in her eyes, kept replaying. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the thought. Something unspoken had sparked, and I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to stop thinking about it. A week later, I found myself back at the garage. I didn't really have a reason to be there. My car was fine, but I told myself I was helping out, that it was practical. She was there, sleeves rolled up again, hair pinned back this time, a faint crease between her brows as she studied a worn-out brake caliper. She didn't greet me. Not with a smile, not with a casual word. Just a slight lift of her chin that I couldn't quite read. I lingered by the tool bench, pretending to adjust a wrench while watching her. Her hands moved deliberately, strong yet precise, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers when she paused. Maybe fatigue, maybe something else. I didn't ask. I didn't want to intrude. "Are you sure that's seated right?" I ventured, my voice softer than I meant it. She glanced at me briefly, lips pressed together, then let out a half-laugh, not quite amused, more like surprised at the interruption. "Yeah, I think so." Her tone was clipped, measured. She didn't elaborate, didn't invite conversation, but her shoulders relaxed slightly as she said it. Just a flicker of trust, I thought, though it was tempered by caution. As we worked side by side, I noticed the small things I hadn't before. The subtle way she chewed her lower lip when focused, the quiet rhythm of her breathing after a long bend over the engine, the way her eyes softened for just a moment when she thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would break through the distance, but I stayed silent, letting my observation be my offering. At one point, she leaned over the car hood, and I caught the scent of coffee on her sleeve, a faint trace of cinnamon. I realized then how tired she looked, shadows under her eyes, a slight slump in her posture. But she carried herself with a kind of unspoken insistence, a refusal to let exhaustion show too plainly. "Do you need a hand with the torque wrench?" I asked. She hesitated, fingers pausing on the tool as if considering the offer. For a moment, the guard slipped. I caught a flicker of weariness and vulnerability in her eyes. She nodded, not fully, just enough for me to move closer. My hands hovered near hers, ready to guide if needed, and for the briefest instant, time stretched. She didn't look at me. She focused on the wrench, on the car, but the air between us charged, heavy and intimate. I could feel her pulse in the slight press of her fingers against mine as she adjusted the bolt. A quiet, careful rhythm, but enough to leave me aware of every tiny motion. And then she leaned back just slightly, a sigh escaping, almost inaudible, and looked at the ceiling. The moment lingered, tense, suspended, fragile, and I realized I wasn't just watching a mechanic at work. I was witnessing something private, something carefully hidden, and I knew I'd carry it with me, replay it in the quiet corners of my mind. Something unspoken had shifted again, subtle but undeniable. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if it was dangerous or harmless. All I knew was that I couldn't stop noticing, and that every small glance, every hesitant gesture, pulled me closer without a word. It was nearly closing time, the garage dim except for the fluorescent lights casting long, flickering shadows across the concrete floor. Outside, rain hammered against the windows in uneven drifts, a soft percussion that made everything feel smaller, more intimate. She was crouched by the rear axle, hands smeared with grease, hair sticking to her damp forehead. I knelt across from her, pretending to check my own tools, but my gaze kept drifting. "Can you pass me the wrench?" she said, and I leaned in, our knees brushing. A jolt ran up my arm at the contact, and I nearly swallowed my own breath. She didn't flinch, or maybe she did just enough that I noticed, a micro-movement only I would catch. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the storm outside filling the spaces between our breaths. Then she paused, letting her head drop slightly, fingers twisting the edge of a rag. "I don't usually get help with this," she murmured. Not a complaint, not an invitation, just a truth that felt exposed in the quiet. I didn't know what to say. The words hovered in my throat, heavy with possibility and impossibility both. Instead, I handed her the wrench, careful not to let my fingers brush hers too deliberately, though my pulse thumped in protest. The proximity made everything harder. Every small gesture felt amplified. The way she leaned just slightly closer to see the torque indicator, the faint exhale she didn't realize escaped, the subtle tremor in her hand when she tightened the bolt. I wanted to say something, anything, but the fear of crossing a line, of making the wrong move, held me back. Then her phone buzzed on the workbench. She glanced at it, a flash of irritation and resignation crossing her face. She muttered something under her breath, then pressed the screen flat against the metal and ignored it. I didn't ask who it was, though curiosity pricked at me. That interruption, small as it was, reminded me sharply that the world existed outside this quiet bubble between us. She finally looked up, eyes catching mine for the briefest fraction of a second, and I saw a hesitation there, a crack in her armor. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the space with a word, a hand, a confession I wasn't ready to give. But I didn't. Instead, I let my hand hover near the toolbox, pretending to be occupied, letting my presence speak instead. The rain picked up, louder now, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. I could almost smell the faint trace of her shampoo mixing with oil and metal, and the urge to close that distance, to lean closer, was unbearable. My chest tightened, a warning I tried to ignore. And then she shifted slightly to adjust the wrench, her knee brushing mine again, longer this time. It wasn't accidental. I could feel it. My hand twitched, half reaching, half retreating, as if my body understood something my mind was still refusing to admit. We froze in that moment, neither of us moving, the storm outside echoing the tension inside. I wanted to speak, to move closer, to let the unspoken truth slip between us, but the words caught. The movement stopped, and the moment lingered like smoke, heavy and unavoidable. I left the garage that night with my hands smelling of oil and the memory of her knee against mine burned into my mind. Something had almost happened, something that didn't, and that impossibility felt more electric than anything that had yet occurred. This part heightens the tension and builds that almost but not quite intimacy, keeping the slow burn alive while external pressures remind us of the limits. The garage was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had left, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint echo of rain still tapping against the windows. She was leaning against the workbench, arms crossed, eyes distant. I stood across from her, pretending to organize tools, but I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down, thick and unrelenting. Finally, she spoke. "What are we doing?" Her voice was low, controlled, but every word carried the tremor of someone wrestling with themselves. She didn't look at me, just stared at the cracked floor tiles, tracing lines with the tip of her boot. I froze. I had no answer. Every instinct told me to speak, to defuse the tension with a joke or a shrug, but that would have been dishonest. The question hovered between us, almost tangible. I don't know," I admitted, quieter than I wanted. My fingers fidgeted with a rag I'd been holding, twisting it until it was damp with sweat. She finally looked up, and the light caught her eyes in a way that made me pause. There was exhaustion there, yes, but also clarity, a recognition that we could no longer pretend. We'd been skirting around something unavoidable, and now it had a name: uncertainty. "I thought I understood things," she murmured, almost to herself. "I thought I knew where all of this was going." She gestured vaguely, not at me, not at anything, but at the space between us. "And now I'm not sure I know anything at all." Her words weren't angry or accusatory. They were raw, fragile. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because the tension was finally given voice. Fear because it meant there was no turning back, no hiding behind casual gestures or small touches. I stepped closer, careful not to close the distance too abruptly, aware that my presence itself was loud. "We're figuring it out," I said. The words sounded weak, even to me. She shook her head, and for a moment, she laughed softly, half bitter, half incredulous. "Figuring it out," she repeated, letting the phrase linger in the air like a challenge. Her gaze held mine, steady and probing, as if daring me to give a better answer. The silence returned, heavier this time. Not the quiet of avoidance, but the quiet of recognition, of raw honesty hanging between two people who couldn't pretend anymore. I noticed the small things, the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her lips, the way her hands gripped the edge of the workbench as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would make it better, but I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, the air thick with unspoken truths, and watch her struggle with her own reflection in this moment. She exhaled slowly, long and deliberate, and her voice finally dropped into a whisper, almost lost beneath the hum of the lights. "I don't think I can pretend this is normal anymore." And with that, the air shifted. Something had been broken open, not violently, but irrevocably. I realized I had no idea how we would navigate the space that had suddenly appeared between us, and yet, for the first time, it felt unbearably real. I came back the next afternoon, partly because I wanted to, partly because I couldn't stop thinking about her. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil and rain, the same way it always did, but something was different this time. She was sitting on a stool, hands folded over her knees, eyes fixed on a small, worn photograph she held like it was fragile glass. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She seemed to invite my presence with the mere tilt of her head. After a long pause, she finally spoke. He left without a word," she said quietly, not looking at me. Her fingers traced the outline of the figure in the photograph, thumb brushing the faded edge. "Years ago, and somehow, I never really got over it." I swallowed, trying not to let my throat betray me. The air between us was heavy, thick with shared silence, and I realized I had been holding my own breath again. I wanted to say something, anything, but what could I say that wouldn't diminish what she was feeling? "You're still carrying it," I finally murmured, my voice softer than I intended. She gave a half smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't think anyone would notice, she admitted. Her hands shook slightly as she set the photo down. It's like, sometimes you think time will fix things, but it doesn't. Not really. I stepped closer, careful to let my body language speak where words would fail. I understand, I said, though I didn't really. Not fully. But I could see it in the way her shoulders sagged, in the subtle tremor of her lips, in the tiny hesitations in her movements. That quiet ache had roots I didn't want to touch too forcefully, but I couldn't ignore it either. She looked up at me then, eyes wide, unguarded. Do you ever lose someone you can't bring back? Her question lingered between us, not a demand, not a test, just a truth that needed acknowledging. I stopped, unsure of what to say. I had no words that could make it better. Instead, I nodded, letting the silence answer for me. And in that nod, I hoped she could feel some small fraction of understanding, of empathy, even if it wasn't perfect. Her gaze dropped again to the photograph. I thought I had moved on, she whispered, almost to herself, but I guess some things never really leave. I noticed the faint catch in her breath, the way her fingers lingered over the photo, the subtle tension in her jaw as she tried to hold herself together. I wanted to bridge the gap, to say something that would make the heaviness lift, but I stayed still. I just watched, absorbing every small detail, knowing that this moment, fragile, human, honest, was more powerful than any words I could force. And then she exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to shake the space around us. She met my eyes, just for a second, and in that fleeting glance, everything shifted. Something unspoken passed between us, an understanding, a pull, a recognition that the weight of the past could never fully be escaped, but could be quietly shared. I left her then, my hands empty, my chest heavy, but the memory of that glance stayed with me, echoing long after the garage door closed behind me. It was evening, and the garage had emptied again. The storm from days before had left the air cool and damp, settling a quiet over everything. She was leaning against the tool chest, arms crossed loosely, shoulders relaxed in a way that seemed deliberate but vulnerable. I stayed nearby, my hands resting on the edge of the workbench, pretending to sort tools, but really just watching her. We didn't speak at first, just shared the space, the silence heavy but comfortable in its own way. I could feel the tension from the last few weeks, all the small sparks, the half-glances, the unspoken truths, finally softening into something tangible but subtle. You've been quiet today, she said finally, not accusing, just noting. Her voice had that familiar mix of strength and weariness that always made me listen harder. I started then stopped. Words weren't necessary. I didn't need to claim anything, not yet. I only needed to be present. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, and for the first time, I saw the weight of everything she had carried, the past heartbreak, the careful distance, the moments of vulnerability. But she wasn't asking for rescue, not from me. She was just letting me see, and that was enough. I stepped a little closer, careful, deliberate. She didn't pull back. Our hands hovered near each other, just shy of touch, and I could feel the unspoken understanding in that small space. No confessions, no dramatic proclamations, just recognition that we had both arrived here, slowly, honestly, on our own terms. She let out a small breath, and I realized we were both holding ourselves taut, waiting, testing the boundaries of what could happen without forcing it. I reached out then, softly, letting my fingers brush against hers. A small contact, almost accidental, but enough to make our proximity undeniable. She didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted slightly, letting our hands rest together, subtle but deliberate. Time seemed to slow. The garage noises, the hum of a distant heater, the faint drip of condensation, faded into the background. In that quiet, shared moment, everything we hadn't said was understood. The past, the uncertainty, the longing, they were all acknowledged in the simplicity of touch and presence. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The connection was there, quietly, in the shared understanding, in the gentle leaning closer, in the subtle brush of fingers that made everything feel heavier and lighter at the same time. Finally, she exhaled, and I felt the tension leave her shoulders. I mirrored it, letting my own body relax. We sat there like that for a long moment, hands almost intertwined, eyes occasionally meeting, sharing small smiles that said more than words ever could. And then she leaned her forehead lightly against my temple, just for a second, but long enough to seal everything. Trust, recognition, closeness. No promises, no declarations, just presence. I rested my head against hers, letting the quiet settle. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down. We were here, together in that moment, and that was enough. This closes the emotional peak with realism, intimacy, and quiet resolution, without turning it into a fairy tale confession. It's been months since that evening in the garage, the quiet one where nothing had been said, yet everything had shifted. I still remember the weight of her hand against mine, the faint warmth of her forehead resting against my temple. It wasn't a moment of passion or drama, but it marked the point where things became real. I think about her often, in ways I didn't expect. I notice the small things now, the way she tilts her head when she's listening, the soft inflection in her voice when she's tired, the way her fingers fidget absent-mindedly with a wrench even when she's not working. Those little details, once invisible to me, feel like part of a language we developed silently, a shared understanding that doesn't need words. And me, I've changed too. I notice my own hesitations now, my urge to speak before thinking, the way I carry myself around people I care about. She's taught me that closeness doesn't need declarations, that trust can be earned quietly, that connection can exist in shared silence and in gestures smaller than a heartbeat. We aren't perfect. Nothing about this has been tidy or predictable, but the truth is, the imperfection is part of it. The slow, messy, unspoken tension, the near misses, the small gestures, the moments of honesty, have made whatever exists between us stronger. It's a quiet love, grounded in presence and trust, not in sweeping declarations or dramatics. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at a memory, the faint tremor of her fingers as she worked the wrench, the half-laugh she gave me in the dim light, the unspoken question she asked with a glance, and I feel a warmth that doesn't demand explanation. That warmth has changed me. It's not about possession or urgency. It's about recognition, about being seen and seeing her in ways that words could never fully capture. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe nothing will change, or maybe everything will, in ways we can't predict. But I do know that those small, quiet moments have left a permanent mark on me. They've taught me that love isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the stillness that follows a storm, the comfort of being understood, the weight of a hand in yours that says, without words, I see you, and I'm here. And in that knowledge, I finally understand what matters: presence, trust, and the courage to sit with someone in silence until words feel unnecessary. That is enough. That has always been enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?